Live from the Pix 11 Social Media Center, she's got more than 30 years on the streets as an investigative reporter. Now, Pix 11's Mary Murphy takes you deep into the world of cold cases, terrorism, America's drug crisis, and more. These are the Mary Murphy Files.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us on Pix 11 Facebook Live. We have a very, very important show this evening, and it really concerns one little boy who was killed in his home just about 3 years ago. He was 6 years old. Here's his picture. His name was Zymere Perkins. A heartbreaking story. His mother's boyfriend accused of viciously beating him with a broomstick, and then the mom not doing anything, standing by passively. She's now testifying in the murder case against her boyfriend. So we wanted to look at what was said during this trial, and also the guest tonight that I have, very pleased that he's here, the ACS Commissioner, David Hansell, Administration for Children's Services. You were appointed to that role after Zymere died.
That's right,
He was
Mary.
killed in September 2016, and I know there was an overhaul at ACS. You were brought in, the previous commissioner left, and a lot's been done. What do you think is the main thing that you've changed there?
Well, Mary, first of all, thank you very much for having me. This is a great opportunity to talk about the work that we've done at ACS. You know, when I became commissioner about almost 3 years ago now, and it was in the wake of the terrible, terrible tragedy of Zymere Perkins' death, I realized that I needed immediately to do a really deep examination of the agency, what was working well and what we needed to change. And so I initiated a top-to-bottom review. I looked at every aspect of the work we do, all of our child protective work, all our investigations. And as a result of that, over the last few years, we've made very substantial changes at ACS. We have strengthened the way we do our investigations when people call because they're concerned that a child may be abused or neglected and we have to go out and do an investigation. We've strengthened our ability to do that. We've given resources to our amazing child protective workers that actually do those investigations. I really think we're in a much better position today to make sure that we are carrying out our mission of keeping children safe across New York City.
I want to show the hospital surveillance. There's been evidence presented at the trial, and the mother is seen bringing her lifeless son, he's limp, into the hospital. I think it was St. Luke's Hospital on that day in September 2016. She goes in, and at first, you see the emergency room, and people are just there, and she goes by with the child. She actually tried to set him down, and he couldn't stand. And then you see the emergency personnel spring into action. They realize this is an emergency, this is a trauma, and they couldn't save Zymere. And when the details came out about what he went through, I mean, you'll see some of the personnel now rushing. They had to go to another room, and another emergency care worker took the child at one point, but he couldn't be saved. And what's coming out now at the trial is that he sustained abuse for a solid year at least. And there was an article written a couple of days ago that said he actually endured water torture. I mean, did you review the case files on Zymere before you moved ahead and made all these changes?
Oh, we have reviewed the case exhaustively, absolutely. As we do any time there's a tragedy like this, we look at it as an opportunity to learn what we can do to improve our investigations to keep tragedies like that from happening again in the future.
There was something else that came out at the trial about the conditions the family was in, water torture, a filthy bathtub where this child was put under a shower. And, we have articles of his clothing from the day he was killed. When you see these kind of photos, just as a human being, I mean, as a reporter, I've done police stories for over 30 years, but when I see something like this, my heart really breaks.
Yeah, no, it's a horrible thing. And I have to say, our child protective specialists who do these investigations, anytime anyone in New York City calls and said, I think a child may be in trouble, I think a child may be abused, I think a child may be neglected, it is our child protective specialists who have to investigate. We do that about 60,000 times a year.
ACS has 60,000 investigations a year?
We do about 60,000 investigations a year. And as you can imagine, every one of them is a situation where we have to get to the bottom of what's going on, make sure that there isn't a situation where a child is in serious danger or serious jeopardy. And I have to say, the child protective specialists who do that work, they are truly our first responders in New York City when children are in danger. And it is important to to speak to the importance of the work that they do. And what's been important to me as the commissioner is to make sure we're giving them the support they need so that they can do every one of those 60,000 investigations the way that we expect them to make sure that we're keeping every child in New York City safe. And so we've done an enormous amount to provide that kind of support to those workers so that they can actually do this work as well as they possibly can.
We've heard of children dying in the last few years. Children die every year due to abuse, but I don't know if we heard something like this. And with the testimony coming out in the last week, it was very jarring. A broomstick was used, a shower rod, and they put it into evidence. And after this happened with Zymere, I believe that you added on 1,100 new specialists. That's an enormous amount of personnel.
Yes, we've added about 1,100 new child protective specialists over the last 2 years because we knew we needed more staff to do this kind of work. One of the problems that I faced when I first became the commissioner, about 6 months after this terrible tragedy, was that I felt the caseloads that each of those workers was carrying was too many for them to give enough attention to every single investigation. So we added more workers. We've provided more support, as I said, to the workers. And today, I'm happy to say, our average caseloads for those workers are about half of what they were 2.5 years ago.
That's an enormous difference. I mean, I think at one point it went up to 14 caseloads per worker. Now it's down to about 7.2.
7.6 actually is our current level. We went up to about 14.8 at our highest point. So it's about half, down by 50%.
And so by adding all the personnel, is that a key reason why you were able to reduce the load?
It's certainly hiring more staff for sure, but it's also providing the support to those staff so that they can do the work. You know, they have to go out to all corners of New York City, all 5 boroughs. We operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because we never know when a report's going to come in. So it's important they can get out to a home quickly to make sure a child is safe. It's important they can access information quickly so they can find out, is this a family we know about? Have we ever worked with this family before? Are there things they should know before they visit that home? All of that they need to have at their fingertips very, very quickly. And so we've invested in technology so that they can get that information. We're now, for example, we're using zip cars. Many of us in New York City use zip cars ourselves. Well, our child protective specialists are using zip cars so they can immediately get out to a home, begin an investigation, make sure that a child is safe.
Now, we have what we call the perp walk when Zymere's mother and her boyfriend were taken out of the precinct after they were arrested in 2016. That is the man who's now on trial, Rasheem Smith, mom's boyfriend, charged with murder too. And she was charged also in the case. She eventually pleaded guilty to manslaughter in the 2nd degree, and I understand Zymere Perkins, the mom, has done about 3 years in prison so far and may face another 2 to 6 when the trial is over. But we often find that the women are kind of allowing this behavior by the men in their lives. Obviously, women abuse too. They abuse their children. But do you see patterns that emerge in the households?
Well, you know, every family is different. Every family different. Every pattern is different. But one of the things that we do focus on is making sure that any caretaker, whether it's a mother or a father or another relative, has what we call the protective capacity to keep their children safe. And one of the ways that we intervene in situations is to make sure that we're providing parents with the supports that they need so that they can exercise that protective capacity. They can make sure they can keep their kids safe, they can send them to school, they can make sure they're going to the doctor. You know, everything that a child needs in order to develop as a healthy child, we want to make sure that the parents have the resources to do that and to keep their children safe. So that's one of the main ways that we work with families, because our role, really, our goal in most situations is to make sure that parents have what they need to care for their kids. We know most parents want to be good parents. Almost all parents want to be good parents. We want to help them to do that whenever we can.
I was telling you as we came up on the elevator that I've covered these kinds of stories for over 30 years. And when Zymere was killed, I did a piece about one child abuse case per decade that I've covered that seemed to represent the horror of that decade. I'm going to play that piece and then we'll talk about that a little bit.
Lisa's a little girl. So what are you doing here?
Having dinner.
The voice of 6-year-old Lisa Steinberg.
I said, Lisa,
"What is that mark on your cheek?" And she said, "Oh, my little brother hit me."
Attorney Joel Steinberg and book editor Hedda Nussbaum were arrested in the first grader's 1987 death. Their status as professionals generating international headlines, 2 children in their home never legally adopted.
I thought he ought to be boiled in oil.
Prosecutors decided Nussbaum was a battered woman and may provide the only clues about what happened that night in their village brownstone. So she testified.
Shall I call 911?
Nussbaum claimed Steinberg threw Lisa against a wall before going out to dinner, thinking the child was staring at him, then returned to freebase cocaine. 10 years after Lisa, Pix 11 broke another horrific story of abuse, which exposed administrative holes in the city's Board of Education. 8-year-old Justina Morales of Brooklyn had missed school for more than a year with nobody noticing.
She was murdered, but it's just who murdered her.
Luis Santiago was the boyfriend of Justina's mother, Denise, and said the little girl tried to break up a domestic fight.
It got ugly when the little girl got in the way.
Denise Solero ultimately testified Santiago tried to drown Justina before suffocating her. She had held her daughter's hand through all of this. The child's dying words, "Mommy, make me pretty." Justina's body thrown out with the trash on New Year's Day 1996 and never found. Nearly a decade later, the torture and murder of 7-year-old Zymere Brown would rock the city to its core during the Bloomberg administration.
You can expect us to be held accountable.
U.S. Marines, moved by the brutal details of Zymere's life and death, served as pallbearers at her funeral.
My heart is broke. I got grandkids too.
The child's mother and stepfather, both charged with murder, Zymere fatally beaten because she had eaten a cup of yogurt. The single piece of evidence that came to symbolize the torment the child endured was this school chair with a nylon cord attached. Zymere would be tied to it, raped by her stepfather, and isolated from her siblings. Horrific sexual abuse as well as physical abuse, and just when you think it can't get any worse, we had Zymere's case. You know, I had a viewer writing, Yasmin Amira, saying, "This has been happening since I was a kid. We used to have so many murals dedicated to children murdered at the hands of their parents or their lovers. We're running out of space. It's time to stop it. If I hear screaming or excessive crying, I'm banging down a door. This has got to stop." What advice do you have for people who live in apartment buildings or live in neighborhoods and the house next door? What should they be doing?
Well, the first thing, of course, is if you're concerned about a child, you should call the state hotline. Call 311 and they'll connect you to the hotline. But we count on all New Yorkers to be eyes and ears to make sure that children are safe. And so the first thing to do, if you're concerned, call in and if the report comes to us, we will investigate it and make sure that the children are safe.
And some people are afraid of getting involved, but how can you live with yourself?
Well, you can call anonymously. You don't have to give your name. And you can start the process that way.
I know in Zymere's case, there had been about 5 different investigations that were opened by ACS. 3 of them were founded. In one case, the teacher said he came in with what seemed to be a broken jaw, bruises all over his body. He said twice to his teachers that his boyfriend, the mother's boyfriend, was, putting him in the shower and putting the cold water on him, making him stand at night. When teachers get such graphic details, how involved should they get if there doesn't seem to be any action on the part of an agency like ACS or the police department?
Well, teachers, of course, often have the most contact with children, and teachers are what we call mandated reporters. If they see indications that a child has been abused or neglected by the parents, they are required to make a report of that. And we work very closely with both the Department of Education and also with many of the charter schools, where, of course, many of our students go, to make sure that they are paying attention and they are alerting us when they see concerns so that we can move forward and do an investigation. So our partnership with the Department of Education is a very important one. They provide, of course, very important services to children, but working with them is part of the way that we make sure that children are safe and are getting support, and making sure children are going to school, which is critical for their development.
So one of your staff members, Marissa Kaufman, sent us a lot of the initiatives that you've undertaken since you became commissioner. And I read that now there are more cases of children going into foster care with a relative or someone very close to the family, not as many strangers taking care of them. Can you explain that?
Yes. Well, first of all, there are fewer children going into foster care altogether, which we're very happy about, because what it means is that in situations where we do work with a family, identify concerns in a family, more and more often today, we're able to keep that family together, keep that child at home, and provide services to the parents to make sure that the children is safe and the parents are getting the support that they need to be able to care for those children. So more children are staying out of foster care. But there are, of course, situations where we do need to place children in foster care for their safety. And then our goal is always to try to find either a relative, a close friend, maybe a teacher, someone who has a relationship with that child. Because one of the things we know is if a child is going to go into foster care, there's much less trauma associated with that if they're going to be cared for by someone they know and have a relationship with. So that's our goal, and more often we're able to do that today.
And you're keeping more of the caseworkers than you used to. The attrition rate is not as high as it used to be.
Yes, and I think that's because of the things that we're doing to provide more support for the caseworkers. We're providing, as I said earlier, more technology, better transportation. We're focused very much on training. We've extended our training period, so we make sure that when caseworkers are going out in the field, they have the skills and information and the background to do the job well. And as I say, we're really trying to acknowledge the fact, and I think it's very important for all New York City residents to acknowledge the fact, that these child protective specialists do a really heroic job. They're out there every day and every night making sure that children across New York City are safe. And it's a difficult job, and we want to make sure that they have the support to do it well.
I'm going to read another comment. You know, some people feel they're unfairly targeted by ACS. Marlon Morris, she said, funny how ACS will bother good parents, and they can see it, but they choose not to handle the real cases, the ones that they really need to look at. I mean, that's kind of a comment that maybe not everyone would agree with, but what are your thoughts about that comment? Because there probably are a lot of people who think that.
Well, there are. Well, Mary, people should know that we don't choose which cases to investigate. The cases that we investigate are the ones that come to us because someone, it could be a neighbor, it could be a teacher, it could be a doctor, it could be a social worker, someone has called the state hotline because they're worried a child has been abused or neglected. That's why we begin an investigation.
You're not unfairly targeting, you're saying.
We respond because someone has told us that they're concerned.
Right, so when people say they're unfairly targeted, maybe that's not a fair statement because someone made a phone call on them. Is that why?
Well, there are situations where people use the hotline for harassment purposes. We're very concerned about it. That is actually a criminal act.
How often does that happen, do you think?
I don't think it happens often, but it does happen. And there are penalties for doing that. And in situations where it comes to our attention and we have confirmation that somebody is doing it, we will and we can make referrals to the district attorney's office to consider prosecuting people for doing that. So it doesn't happen often, but it is obviously it's a terrible abuse of the system, and it diverts our resources from the investigations that are really important where children may in fact be in danger.
I want to go back to something I brought up before. In this case, Zymere's case, his mother was arrested with her boyfriend when he first died, but then she made a deal to testify for the prosecution. She pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, manslaughter in the second degree. Some people have a problem with that, but that happens often in criminal cases that I've covered, that one of the adults in the household will plead guilty to a lesser charge and then testify against the other one. And the other thing that stands out from Hedda Nussbaum to the mother of Justina Morales, they're with a man that's clearly abusing their child, and they're staying with that person. And it seems like a mindset that maybe they grew up with. Maybe it's a multi-generational thing. What do you get involved in parenting services or counseling to help women see kind of what they're putting up with and the dangers they're putting their children into?
Absolutely, Mary. Domestic violence is something we are very concerned about, and we do see a lot of domestic violence. And it doesn't just affect the two parents, it can often affect the children, as you're pointing out. And so we do, our first thing to do is to make sure the kids are safe. But if we need to intervene in a way to make sure that the person who's being abused, and it is not always, but it is often the woman in the relationship, to make sure she's safe, that she's protected. There are lots of services for domestic violence victims across New York City. And then, as you say, to make sure that she and sometimes, both parents also get services to break that cycle, to break that pattern of domestic violence.
You have some success stories?
We do. We do. We have seen situations where we can really change the pattern in a family, where we can really get parents to both to live with and relate to each other in a healthier way, and also to create a healthier home environment for the child or for the children.
But sometimes the mother or the father, who's ever being abused, may have to make the decision to leave and bring the child to safety.
That's correct. Or there are situations where we will, when we absolutely need to do this, go to court and get an order to exclude the abuser from the home if that's necessary.
So with the foster care situation, do you have any idea how many children are currently in foster care?
We have just under 8,300 children in foster care in New York City today.
8,300?
8,300. That compares to about 10 years ago, we had about 17,000 children in foster care in New York City. If you go back 20, 25 years ago, at one point we had more than 50,000 children in foster care in New York City.
Are these children doing better, though? I mean, that's a big difference. I mean, they're not staying in households where they shouldn't be. The fact that it's far less.
That's because we're able to provide services to those parents in order to keep those children safely at home. Mm-hmm. So the children are safe. We have a whole range of providers that offer what we call preventive services. Basically, when someone comes to our attention or a family comes to our attention, our goal is to keep the children safe and to prevent any future abuse or neglect of those children. And we have a strong set of services to do that. That's enabled us to keep families together, keep children at home where it's safe to do that, serve the families, and have fewer children coming into foster care.
So as we end tonight, I want to show another picture of Zymere. He's the reason that you're in this position now. You came, you overhauled the agency. This trial is still going on. What do you think is the most important thing that you've done in ACS since Zymere was killed?
Well, you know, we've looked really at every aspect of the work that we do to make sure that we can do it as strongly as possible. There's nothing more important to us than protecting children. We've done everything we can to prevent tragedies like Zymere Perkins' death from happening again. And I have an extraordinary staff of child protective workers who spend all of their time, all of their waking hours in many cases, protecting the children in New York City. And I think the most important thing that we have done is to create the environment and the support that enables them to do that, and to carry out our commitment to the people of New York City to protect children and to support families.
Commissioner David Hansell with the Administration for Children's Services, we thank you so much for coming to the Pix 11 Social Media Center, and I can't think of a more important topic than this one.
Well,
I
thank
really
you.
can.
Thank you for
so
having
much.
me, Mary. I appreciate it.
Okay. I thank our viewers for being with us. I hope they will share this program because there's a lot to learn from it. And I look forward to seeing you next week, next Monday night at 7. Thank you again. Have a good night.